Oh, so cold. So cold. So cold. So cold. Come here, Mark. So cold. So cold. Whew. Oh my God, this is so ridiculous. We've been out here and we saw a Bigfoot and he gave me this shirt. Let me see if I can open it. He gave me this shirt. It's really weird. It turns out he was bought by the Chinese. And you know, that's just what he does. And then we had to resort to drinking our own piss. Drinking our own piss, Mark. Then we ran to that fucking saber-toothed tiger and shit, and we almost died. It's like we're at the bottom of the fucking food chain, thanks to Patrick fucking Galvin and his goddamn Space Godzilla statue fucking thing, whatever the hell that was. I saw the review. Now we're starving, Mark. We're starving, man. I'm so fucking cold.
Adam, it's only been a day. This sucks. Place is gone. What the hell are we gonna do?
Well, Mark, you know how it takes forever to construct something or to rebuild something? It takes years even. Well, what if I told you that I could have it all back in a matter of seconds? Well, all we have to do is put our faith and trust into a George Lucas-style wipe. Observe.
Actually, it's a bit cold.
Okay.
Oh my God, it worked. It really worked. Oh jeez, my headphones, my phone, my TV, my Wii U. Princess Peach amiibo. Look, my mess.
Well, time to do a review.
Wait a minute. You're just gonna go ahead and do this review? I mean, what about all this stuff that happened? Are you gonna do anything about it?
Oh, he's not just going to get away with it, Mark. I'm going to tear him a new asshole. One so large, so round, that even Caligula wouldn't have to loop up his fists to get it up in it. One where every time he has to fart, he won't be able to hold it in. Instead of a it'll be a simple whoa. My God, I'll make that bastard pay. I'll make him pay so much, he will be able to pay back the national debt.
I'm sorry, what?
For the 1960 epic Spartacus, directed by Stanley Kubrick and starring Kirk Douglas. Now, right from the get-go, I would like to apologize for my voice. I'm coming down from a very, very nasty cold in which I completely lost my voice. And I'm just barely getting it back. So please forgive the kind of, like, I don't know how to describe it, but kind of like clogged up sounding voice of mine and kind of crackiness of my voice. So I immediately apologize to that, and I completely blame a certain somebody in Nebraska for completely not only destroying my home, but making me have to live out in the woods. Even when I destroyed his homes, he didn't have to live out in the woods for very long. Now, as for Spartacus, I remember not liking... I saw this a few times when I was a child, and I didn't really like the movie itself. It bored me, to be completely honest. It wasn't like Ben-Hur, where I was just captivated the entire way through, or the Ten Commandments, which I was just captivated the entire way through. I felt very bored with this movie. But I decided to rewatch it. I was on a bit of an epic binge, judging by the last few reviews that I just put up. And I said, you know what, I'll rewatch Spartacus. All I can say is that I'm glad I did. Because in hindsight, I would like to call myself, right in front of all of you, a fucking retard for thinking that this was a boring movie. This is a very captivating movie. It is a magnificent piece of cinema that deserves all the praise that it could possibly fucking get. This is a magnificent movie that completely blew me away and engrossed me in the universe it presented. From the production design, to the acting, to the cinematography, to the directing, which we'll actually get into those a little later. This is an astonishing movie, and what I think makes this epic kind of stand out is that this epic is based on completely true events. This isn't like Ben-Hur, which has true events take place in it, but is told from the point of view of this fictitious person. This is completely based on fact. This is completely based on history, as far as we know. There are some inaccuracies with this film, but for the most part, it's pretty damn accurate, down to the politics of Rome. By the way, I find it so funny that no one can just say Rome in this movie. Everyone has to say Rome. It's funny why this movie was made. The only reason why Spartacus was made, and this is completely true, you cannot deny it, you cannot fight it, was because Kirk Douglas was so jealous that William Wyler turned him down to play Ben-Hur. Because Kirk Douglas was the runner-up. Ben-Hur was, of course, played by the great and phenomenal actor Charlton Heston. And that made Kirk Douglas a little bitter and very, very jealous, because that movie won the world record in terms of Academy Awards. It won 12. Charlton Heston got an Academy Award, and Kirk Douglas felt a little snubbed. Because of that, Kirk Douglas said, I wanted to make an epic, and the story of Spartacus landed on his desk. And it kind of told a very similar kind of story of like a single man going up against the might of Rome, that kind of thing. And so Kirk Douglas said, let's make Spartacus. And because of that, this was made by Kirk Douglas's production company, and his production company since he was making, was basically that this man was in charge of everything. He was the executive producer, for example, and Kirk Douglas was like ruling this movie with an iron fist. He controlled literally every aspect of production. This movie was directed by Stanley Kubrick. Okay, so I have a lot to say about this. Stanley Kubrick, I love him. He's like one of the greatest directors of all time, and it's so sad that he wasn't recognized until so much later in his career. But Stanley Kubrick is like the best of the directors that ever existed on this planet. And he directed this movie. What's interesting about this is that this movie is very much not Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick, even before this, had a very, sort of specific cinematography style. Like, he has a lot of tracking shots of you going from point A to point B or following a character down a trench like in Paths of Glory. And the only reason why he was hired on to direct this is really funny. But Anthony Mann was originally going to direct this movie. Kirk Douglas hired him, and he directed even the first few sequences of the movie. Kirk Douglas fired him for unknown reasons. And it's kind of debated back and forth. I personally think, some people said, Kirk Douglas wrote in his biography, for example, that he fired Anthony Mann because Anthony Mann seemed very scared of the movie, like he just couldn't handle the size of the film, which I don't think is true, because just a year later, Anthony Mann would be hired by Sam Bronston to make El Cid, which, in my opinion, is one of the top 3 epics of all time. That movie is just fantastic and beautiful. Also, it is said that Douglas just didn't like working with the man. They just didn't agree. Apparently they fought quite a bit on set and everything like that, so Anthony Mann was let go. Now, why Kubrick came onto this project is very interesting. Even Douglas knew that Kubrick wasn't the man to make an epic, wasn't the man to make this kind of story. But Kubrick only agreed to direct this movie because he wanted out with Kirk Douglas. He wanted to get out of this contract he had signed with Kirk Douglas to make a few films for him. And though Kubrick and Douglas liked each other very much, they did. They quarreled quite a bit on set, but they did respect each other. They liked each other. They respected each other as artists. Kubrick wanted to make his own things. Quite frankly, Kubrick's ambitions were kind of growing at around this time period, specifically off the heels of Paths of Glory. And because of that, this movie very much so lacks the Kubrick style, of those tracking shots. There are tracking shots in here, but a lot of times Kubrick uses the one-point perspective, which I love one-point perspective. You'll see my films are just chock full of them. That is when, like the action takes place in the very center of the frame, for example. There's usually a lot of symmetry in those shots. This film lacks that very much. And this was also Stanley Kubrick's first and I believe only time. I'm not sure what he shot 2001: A Space Odyssey on. From what I know of, for a fact, that this is the only film that Kubrick ever used 70mm Technorama instead of the normal camera that Kubrick liked to use so much. And 70mm, again, was something new that came out around this time period. 70mm was, all the grand epics were shot in El Cid, Fall of the Roman Empire, 55 Days of the King, King of Kings. All the Bronston movies are filmed in 70mm. The other one was Lawrence of Arabia, was shot on 70mm. Believe it or not, Dr. Zhivago was not shot on 70mm, but that's for a video on Dr. Zhivago. And 70mm was very expensive, very, very expensive to use because it was a new form of film. Instead of it being the normal 35mm that was the standard for film, and then it was stretched out when using certain lenses and so on and so forth to be the widescreen aspect ratio, and that's still the process that they use today in terms of using film. This was actually a wide shot, like it had to use its own camera and everything like that. And these cameras were big. If you just see some of the behind the scenes pictures of this film, those cameras were fucking huge. They weren't as big as the cameras for Cinerama, but they were pretty fucking big. Because of that, I believe that's why we don't get as many tracking shots as we normally would get. We get a lot of crane shots though, which I do admire, and it really shows off the sets very well. But this lacked the Kubrick look. Like if I hadn't seen the opening credits and somebody told me that Stanley Kubrick directed this movie, I would have been like, what? This doesn't look anything like a Kubrick movie the Kubrick style that we know and love. It does surprise me, and the reason why, in all honesty, isn't because the camera was big or anything like that, because the camera they used on 2001: A Space Odyssey was fucking huge, but yet in that movie looks like a Kubrick film. The reason why is because Kirk Douglas should have basically been called the director on this movie. Yes, Kubrick was the one to kind of command the army and everything. He was the man kind of pulling some of the shots on set. It was really Kirk Douglas. And Kubrick is known for going take after take after take after take after take after take after take of somebody picking up a pencil, for Christ's sakes. Douglas did not let him do that. It was kind of, Douglas, because of course it was his money going into the movie, was very much in control of that set. Douglas was the one who basically was the director of this movie. And quite honestly, I think should have been credited as director of this movie. Not that Stanley Kubrick didn't do his job. Stanley Kubrick most certainly did. Kubrick had gotten a lot of experience working with a lot of extras with Paths of Glory, and of course this is glorified tenfold with the 10,000 extras that they did use on this fucking movie. That's a lot of people. This film was written by Dalton Trumbo, and I want to bring this up because this is a very interesting story, and I actually kind of admire it. Dalton Trumbo was blacklisted at around this time period. This is when the McCarthyism was huge. This is when, the people were being blacklisted for being apparent communists, which, I'll be honest, I don't completely disagree with, but yet I don't completely agree with as well. Trumbo wanted to write under the pseudonym of Sam Jackson, but it was Douglas who urged him not to do this as a bit of a ballsy statement. Brought him out, and basically because he convinced Dalton Trumbo to actually use his name in the credits, it actually brought Dalton Trumbo out of the blacklist. It started giving Dalton Trumbo work. He had work, but he always had to write under like a fake name. And Kirk Douglas was really responsible for bringing the writer out of said blacklist. Now, Kubrick did not like the script. Kubrick thought Spartacus was too perfect of a character. What Kubrick wound up doing when he was doing some of his rewrites of the movie was Kubrick kind of added a lot of Spartacus's faults. For example, it was Kubrick's idea to make Stanley Kubrick a trusting man, and that's what bites him in the rear towards the end of the movie. Him not being a general, which we'll get into all these details a little later. Kubrick added in a lot of the faults to Spartacus, and he actually wanted to go further, but Douglas said, fuck you, and shot him down. And Kubrick
quite frankly, being the smart man he was, and really wanting to get out of this really controlling contract he was in, said, all right, I'll be quiet. Quite frankly, though, I think this script is utterly fantastic. I do. I think this is one of the better written epics out there. I think this is just an utterly beautiful script, and we'll get into reasons why later in terms of the characteristics and stuff. But what I like about it is even the minor characters in this film get some great personalities, and the actors are just so good. And again, that goes more to the director, but the script is very good. This is a deep epic that's just full of commentary about McCarthyism, civil rights, and it's very anti-fascist. Which is funny because it's kind of the total opposite of what Al Cid was. Again, it's kind of funny that Anthony Mann was hired to direct that movie. This was a commentary against McCarthyism, and what was cool, like this, instead of, sci-fi does that a lot. I mean, The Twilight Zone did this quite a bit. Planet of the Apes did this, where they used the sci-fi backdrop to really cover up a lot of stuff on social commentary and so on and so forth. This movie used a backdrop of Rome, which is something that we can kind of relate to because, of course, it deals with politics and so on and so forth. But it's something so far away that we may not be able to see it. And so I think that was very smart. The whole thing about the slaves are like, for civil rights, the slaves stand up against a tyrannical government, that goes in the whole civil rights movement, which hasn't happened yet. This was made in 1960. It's still 4 years away. Of course, anti-fascism, because at this time, there was a lot of talk about radical changes in the U.S. government, because there's all these problems going on at the end of the 50s, and especially through the 60s. This is very at the tail beginning, or the head beginning, of this whole movement and change and radicalization and so on and so forth. This movie has very anti-fascist statements. I mean, Crassus is very clearly the bad guy in this movie, and, well, I shouldn't say, yeah, he's the bad guy. He's definitely the villain, the antagonist, and he's the emperor. He wants order. He wants change. He wants to do it himself because he thinks he is in the right. While you have the hero Cracus, really, who is a bit of a slimy man, but really has his heart in the right place. That's very much so a statement against liberalism and conservatism that was going on in the nation at the time. So this is a very, very smart epic. I just want to hail, he won an Academy Award for this movie that he completely deserved, but Peter Ustinov, who played Nero. I know him most as Nero in Quo Vadis, which you can see my review for that up as well. Peter Ustinov was so good in this movie. He plays the gladiator guy who buys Spartacus and owns that gladiator ring and everything. He sells gladiators for a living. And he's just so good at portraying such a level of like boyishness and sliminess mixed with compassion towards the end of the movie. And I think that really comes out because he's very slimy throughout 90% of this movie until the very end. And what's cool is that the final scenes where he kidnaps Spartacus' wife, he is hired to go take her and then bring her to Cracus and free her. And you can tell that he's genuinely scared. What I like about that is that he's genuinely scared. He's not quite sure what he's doing. Just look at his eyes, and especially when she sees him for the first time. We'll get into the very final scene in a little bit more detail a little later when we get into the relationship between Spartacus' wife and, of course, Spartacus. He's very good. He has very expressive eyes, and his face is round, which makes him look a little boyish. That's all that this character kind of needed. It was kind of like that cowardly kind of character. He's just so good at playing those kind of roles, and he totally deserved that Academy Award in this film. My favorite scene he's in is after Crassus orders all of the captured slaves crucified. Peter Ustin's character is like, you told me I could sell them, and Crassus goes, fuck you, and tells him to get out of his camp and to be flogged the entire way there. He then goes to Cracus. Peter Ustinov goes to Cracus, and they then, he's, getting cleaned up and everything. He says, you know what, I think I'm growing something. And Cracus goes, what? And Peter Ustinov says, I believe I'm growing compassion. And you can see the look on his face, and he looks so confused and so lost because, that's not what his character was throughout 90% of the film. And after he was whipped and beaten and everything, he starts changing. And, he's just a tiny character. And look, I'm kind of gushing about him already. If I got into all the characters that was, really good in this movie, just who have minor roles like John Ireland, I might as well do an audio commentary. And this movie's 3.5 hours long, and I don't think you guys want to listen to an audio commentary for something that's 3.5 hours long. So he quite frankly deserved the Academy Award that he won. He was one of the 4 Academy Awards that this movie won. Now let's go to Cracus. Cracus is a side character that I absolutely adored, one, because I love the actor, and unfortunately I can't remember his name, but credit where credit is due. Cracus is like the slimy, fat politician at first glance. He's like, you don't... He comes off as like the slimy asshole of the Senate, you know, and just by the way he walks, the way he talks and holds his head up high. He has this great line where he goes, "In public I believe in the gods, but in privately I believe in none of them." You know, he's that kind of character, and you're like, oh god, he's a slimy asshole, and he's been teaching Julius Caesar a lot of what he knows about politics, because Julius Caesar isn't a politician, Julius Caesar is a soldier. And so he's kind of Julius Caesar's mentor. And he also says this great line during one of the Senate meetings where they're talking about Crassus becoming a dictator. He says this great line where Cracus goes, "I'd rather have a Rome with some corruption and lots of freedom, and a lot of freedom, than a Rome without either." And I love that line. That there explains his character like crazy. And then again, that kind of goes into the whole debate that was going on in this country at the time. What was going on at the time was that was very much in debate. The country was falling into turmoil. And the debate was, do we want order, or do we want to keep freedom, quite frankly? Order, in which a lot of freedoms will be taken away, or do we want to keep freedom but still have a little sliminess there, because no system is perfect. And I like the fact that this film brings that up, that despite the fact that Roman politics is extremely corrupt and everything like that, it is still the most free nation or empire in the world. Yes, you be taxed and everything like that, and there is a lot of corruption, and again, Cracus brings that up in several scenes, but it's the best system we've got. It has problems, but it's the best one we've got. And I very much like that, and I respect that. I like how this movie wasn't very cut and dry, very black and white. I wish James Cameron took note on that. Like, if Avatar wasn't as black and white as it was, I think that movie could have been so much better. If Titanic wasn't as black and white as it was, that the rich are bad and the poor are good, if it wasn't as black and white as that, you would have had an excellent movie, in my opinion, on your hands. What I like about this movie is that it wasn't black and white. That example, there's a lot of great reasons why you should go with Crassus and talk about order, especially considering all the civil wars that is explained that's going on at this time, and the two wars going on two fronts, one in Spain and one in Asia. The Roman Empire, quite frankly, is in chaos, and that's explained several times throughout this movie, and I very much so enjoy that, specifically in the Senate scenes. And even with Peter Ustav, because there's a scene where Crassus is going to watch these gladiators fight at Peter Ustav's place, and he has a statue of Cracus there because he works with Cracus the most. And all of a sudden when he finds out that Crassus is going there, Laurence Olivier, he suddenly is like, hide all the things. I don't want to hide all the statues I have of Cracus. I don't want to be killed. You know, that kind of goes into the political climate of this movie. That gives me so much hope, believe it or not. The fact that this movie is not black and white. Is not like one way is good and one way is bad. Clearly this movie has a favor, and that is towards, you know, the Senate and towards republicanism, of Rome, the republicanism of Rome, instead of the empire of Rome. This movie doesn't play everything black and white. You kind of have to choose yourself. You can go either way, really, and that's what's awesome. But Cracus wants Rome to remain free. He wants Rome to have elected leaders. He wants Rome to have the Senate, where the Senate have all the say, not a dictator. And in fact, at the very beginning of this movie, one of the lines is, "It was the time of the dictator," or the dawn of the dictator. Is it the dawn of the dictator or the time of the dictator? This movie depicts the beginning, and really Spartacus is around that time period as well, is when Rome was seeing a drastic change. Instead of going from a republic to an empire. That's what was going on in Rome at this time. This movie beautifully captures this. And one of the things that I love about Cracus so much is that he just hates Crassus with every ounce of his massively fat body. And what's cool about it is that you can tell he hates him. But unlike Laurence Olivier, Laurence Olivier's character is full of hatred, and you can just see it in his eyes, Cracus is very calm about it and is very conniving about it. There are several scenes where he's talking with frickin' Julius Caesar, and he at the same time is drinking wine, and he just seems so chill about it. He just seems so relaxed about it. But yet he's one of the smartest men in the movie. The bathhouse scene, Caesar, for example, is starting to kind of agree with Crassus on some things. And Cracus knows this, But even though he knows that Julius Caesar is probably going to wind up signing with Crassus, despite the fact that Caesar was his apprentice, or was his Padawan, I guess, as you would call it in Star Wars, you see Crassus is just so chill. He's just laying there on his thing as the steam is rising around him. He's just explaining, you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. You want to keep the Republic safe. Crassus has a scene in the movie where you can definitely tell he falls, because throughout half of the movie, Crassus has the leg up on Crassus, where he's like, kind of like one step ahead. For example, Crassus, a scene where Crassus is really ahead. Crassus places one of his friends in charge of the Roman guard, and these are the first people to be sent out after Spartacus, after the revolt begins. All of a sudden, Crassus sends that man out to go take care of it with 6 divisions, and at first, that general is like, yes, I'll do it, and I'll be proud to do it. But then he goes to see Crassus to tell him what he thinks is good news, and Crassus is like, no, that means you will be out of the city, which means I have less control over the city. That's the type of politicking that's going on in this movie, and I absolutely love it. This is really cool stuff. I love Roman politics. Roman politics, especially around this time period, is so interesting, and that's one reason why I want to make an epic one day called Julius Caesar, in which I'd shoot it on an IMAX camera, the entire movie on IMAX. But then towards the movie, you start discovering that Crassus has a leg up, and that is when really what happens is Crassus does some very tiny things to disrupt Crassus in several scenes. It was very, very good. For example, banishing that general, despite the fact that they're good friends, when he gets destroyed by Spartacus. Leaving the world of politics. Because Crassus was a politician, really, or in the face. And so there's a scene where he says, I will step down and do nothing but command my army, is something that kind of shows people that, though he's kind of lying about it, that Crassus is for the people. He knows that his place is in the military, and he's stepping down. He knows somebody else can do better. That's what's going on the surface, and that gets a lot of people to like him. Though Crassus sees right through this. And that's the beginning of the downfall of Crassus, is at that moment. Crassus finds out that Spartacus has talked with these pirates to help them escape. And so what Crassus does is, because he's insanely rich, he pays those pirates immediately to help get those slaves to escape. Because he knows that if a war truly starts between Spartacus and Crassus in Rome and the Roman legions, that there is nothing to stop Crassus. Well, Crassus finds out that Crassus paid the... I hate that, how the Crassus and Crassus... They're real people, though, so you can't really fight it. But Crassus finds out that Crassus paid the pirates, and so then all of a sudden he pays the pirates even more. Now this is the checkmate for Crassus. And so Crassus pays the pirates to not show up, and so that the war that Crassus didn't want occurs. And he also manages to prove that Crassus paid those pirates, branding for helping these escaped slaves, for helping this rebellion against Rome, by the way, paints Crassus as a traitor. And Crassus is beaten. It's checkmate. And Crassus has won. And Crassus loves this. And Crassus eventually is like, you will be exiled, and blah, 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 and you will come out and silence your supporters to go instead with the empire. And Crassus is like, okay, I'll do it. But then he kills himself. He's like, no, fuck you. I'm not going to help you. I'd rather die than help you. And though he does it in a very Crassus way, where he's very calm and everything like that, and he has this cool aura about him that you just have to see the movie to believe, and that's wonderful. And another thing that I really like about him is that he has all these slaves, but he treats them so well. The scene where he's going to kill himself, his slaves are all crying, but he sets them all free. He sets them all free. He gives them their freedom papers, and he's like, I'm going to die. And he has this great line where this girl is crying right in front of him, and he says, this is a happy house. There's no room for tears. And stuff like that. And what I also like about it is that because Crassus never paid Peter Ustav his fee for Spartacus' wife as a slave, he uses the right of first dibs, essentially, and he pays Peter Ustav to buy her out, to get her back, after Spartacus' rebellion has been utterly fucking crushed by Crassus, which everyone knew was going to happen. He buys her back, and Peter Rustav kidnaps her and brings her there. And because she is now her property, her and her baby, he gives them both their freedom papers and says, get out of here. Get out of here. And what I like about that is that it's very clear that he's not doing this out of love and compassion, which is why I like Peter, why I like this character, Crackus, because, you know, he still does stuff for his own ambitions and everything. The only reason why he does it is because he does it as a one last fuck you to Crassus, and I fucking love that. Like, I'm just like, yeah, fucking... Crassus is one of those villains, we'll get to him later, that you just love to hate. He is like one of those villains that you just want to see bad things happen to him, especially towards the end of the film. And this is one of those great moments where you just go, fuck yeah. You know, it was one of those moments and great stuff. What was cool about Spartacus, he's played by Kirk Douglas. First off, Kirk Douglas does a phenomenal job. I mean, Kirk Douglas doesn't have any real lines in this movie until about an hour in. Now, this is a 3.5 hour movie, and our main protagonist doesn't have any lines for the first hour. That's pretty ballsy. And I really appreciate that Spartacus is very quiet at the beginning. And it goes to Kirk Douglas, because most of the first act of the movie, which is in the gladiator ring and so on and so forth, is nothing but reaction shots. It's nothing but Spartacus looking around and everything like that. And a lot of that goes with Kirk Douglas's eyes. Kirk Douglas has amazing eyes and everything like that. And you can just see the amount of emotion in his face whenever you see him. And that's wonderful stuff. I mean, he is almost completely silent during the first half of this movie. He does have lines, don't get me wrong, but he's almost completely silent. And it's all done through his eyes. You know exactly what he's thinking about when he sees his wife, his future wife, without any lines. You know exactly what he's thinking, and that's props to him for acting, for his acting role, because that is missing so much in today's movies. If you said to somebody that you're the main actor in a 3-hour movie is not going to have any lines until about an hour, about 1/3 of the way through, studios would be like, fuck that shit, and they'd fucking tell you to go fuck yourself. I miss the days when actors had to act, quite frankly. Now we have places like people like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, all of the people working with Marvel who don't act. They have lines and they say them. They play a character, and there's no real acting. Kirk Douglas here doesn't have to say a word, and you know what he's thinking. And that comes all the way back even when he's crucified, you know. The only other performance I can really think of that has a good performance like this, where you can just look into his eyes and you know immediately what he's thinking in terms of human actors, is Max von Sydow as Jesus in The Greatest Story Ever Told. But anyways, the best scenes with Spartacus, in my opinion, are the scenes with his wife. The scenes where he's standing there with his wife, or hugging her, or holding her. And this is a beautiful relationship. You know, this isn't one of those kind of forced relationships that kind of happen in epics, because epics kind of have to work that way. For example, the one in Ben-Hur, despite it being an amazingly phenomenal movie, has a romance that is already set up. This movie is about the beginning of a romance, and it's very slow and very gradual. In fact, they don't really admit that they love each other. They have an interest in each other, but they don't love each other until over halfway through the movie. That's interesting. Now, I really like that. That's even better than Quo Vadis, and you know how much I adore the one from Quo Vadis. Again, watch that video, plug. What I like about it is that it's not like they look at each other and instantly fall in love. You know, that's a problem with a lot of movies even today. You know, the whole thing, Disney does this a lot. I mean, granted, this is one thing I like about Frozen, is that it kind of turns that cliche on its head. He is given to her to basically fuck as a reward for being a good gladiator. And what's interesting is that he doesn't know what to do. Spartacus even says, this is like one of his only lines in the scene, he goes, I've never had a woman before. And the way how they look at each other is so interesting, because she is clearly used to just being fucked into oblivion by all of these gladiators, to them just using her for her body, and that's it. And suddenly here's Spartacus, who doesn't know what to do. And what's interesting is that even after she strips, he gives her back her clothing. And because he doesn't know what to do, she doesn't know what to do. And that causes her to be interested in him. That causes her to be like, who is this man? Who is this man? What is he doing? And I really love that. because just the way how they look at each other at the beginning, and then when she's pouring him wine in the first few scenes of the movie, when she's pouring him wine, there's a great scene where all he does is just kind of reach out and touch her hand, and you look at each other, and I'm like, wow. There is no real dialogue between these two characters until after the rebellion has begun, which is about an hour into the movie, in which they reunite, and I'm like, oh my god, this is fucking phenomenal. It's all done with, I think her name is Gene Simmons, the girl who plays Spartacus' wife, but she does just a phenomenal job, and it's so beautiful. This relationship is so beautiful, just because they're so fascinated with each other, and then it just blossoms into real love, and this looks genuine, you know, it looks like they genuinely care about each other. And what I love about Spartacus' wife, Gene Simmons, is that she isn't the normal leading female actor. She isn't. She's beautiful and gorgeous, and don't get me wrong, and I like how the decision that kind of whenever she's in frame, or whenever it's a shot of her, it's just a slight soft focus, and I love that. It's like the total opposite of Sophia Loren and El Cid, where Sophia Loren and El Cid is very much so like in your face, like, hurrah, I'm the leading actress. No. Spartacus' wife in this movie is very timid, very fragile looking, very scared. She looks so tiny and small on screen considering all of these gladiators around her. And that's such an interesting take. You know, that's different from epics and everything. She looks so tiny. She doesn't strike you as a leading lady. And that's what I think works with this movie. And this sort of fragileness, this sort of timidness and everything is best portrayed, in my opinion, in a scene where she reveals to Spartacus she is pregnant. What I love about her is that, you know, Spartacus scares her. And she's like, oh my god, blah, 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 blah. And then he holds her and everything like that, and he's like, and then he picks her up, and he's being kind of violent towards her, but even though it's not violent, don't get me wrong, but he's being rough with her. And then she goes, I'm pregnant. She stutters the entire time she's saying it. She talks kind of like this, like, and it's like she's processing what she wants to say. That you don't see in leading actresses in movies. You just don't, and this is so interesting why that's there. And she just looks so tiny when she says, I'm going to have your child. She looks so small. She looks so scared that Spartacus is going to leave her. But instead and at first it looks like he is because he doesn't know what he's going to do. He's going to be a father. And then all of a sudden he's like, no, I love that. Oh my god, I'm going to be a father. That's a wonderful scene. And another example of that is even earlier in the movie where she reunites with Spartacus once the rebellion begins. She just happens to be there. She just kind of steps forward. She's like, oh my god, is that Spartacus? And you just see the look on her face. And then all of a sudden you see Spartacus. He's like, yeah, come on, help us and everything. And then all of a sudden he stops. Dead in his track while all this is going on around her, and he just looks at her. And then as all of the other people start riding away on their horses, suddenly he just slowly gets off his horse and just walks up to her. And they have this great distance between them. And it's like they're too scared to embrace each other. It's like both of them look terrified in their eyes, like Gene Simmons is holding back tears and everything like that. And what I love about it is that they both go through a full range of emotions in about 30 seconds. She goes from shock of seeing Spartacus again because she was sold to Crassus and then she escaped somehow, to sadness where she starts crying, to pure joy and laughter that they have found each other again, and that's when they embrace. And I love that so much. They don't kiss. I noticed that. They don't kiss. But they all go through that arc where all of a sudden they're just in hysterical laughter that they found each other again. And that is, wow, that's just a phenomenal performance. And the only thing where I think just what embodies their relationship the most is the final scene of the movie. The final scene of the movie in general is very bittersweet. When Spartacus' rebellion has been utterly crushed, and we all knew that this was going to happen because the gladiators, quite frankly, had no chance against legions of Roman soldiers. They had no chance. Despite the fact that we were rooting for them, they had no chance. Spartacus has been crucified and everything like that. It's very bittersweet because on one hand, now his wife and his child, which he sees for the first time while he's up on this cross, they are now free. They are no longer slaves. Crassus has freed them. And that is all Spartacus wanted. The entire movie, that's all he fought for, was for them to be free because he loved them. That's all he fought for. Unfortunately, he has to die in the process. You know, that's where the bittersweet comes down. And the look on his face completely shows all of that. Even though he's in significant pain, crucified on this cross, He just looks down at me, he gives a small smile as his green eyes start watering up and everything like that. It's a phenomenal performance. They have to honestly see to fucking believe. It is so good and so wonderful. You have to watch it. On the other hand, she will never see him again. And she knows this, and her eyes are watering up, and she starts crying as she holds her baby, their baby, up to him. And you can tell that he just so wants to reach down and just hold it, but he can't. He can't. And it is so good. It is so good, and just beautifully shot as well. And of course, the rebellion has been crushed and everything, but she is free. This is the beginning of freedom. You know, though this movie doesn't end on a happy note, this is the beginning of freedom. And I love that theme. That is a wonderful thing. And I love that the most. Their relationship is very good, and I can't say enough about it. What's interesting about Spartacus is that Spartacus is not a perfect protagonist. And again, we have to thank Stanley Kubrick for that. I'm very curious to read what Trumbo's first script was, because apparently he only wrote it in 2 weeks. Christ, it took me almost a year to write Monstros. But Spartacus in this movie, as it's presented, is not a perfect character whatsoever. He trusts people far too much, and this is very much so amplified with him and the pirates, where he buys the pirates out in order to, let his people go onto the ships and go to a land of freedom, not occupied by the Romans. Now, what is portrayed in this, and what's his mistake is he puts a down payment. He says, I will get you your gold, but we don't have it right now. Take this as a down payment. He gives them what they have. You don't have to worry about that with the Romans, because the Romans have it already. That's why Cracus paid the pirates to be there, because he knew that the pirates would betray them if they don't do anything, or if somebody offers a better price. Turns out that Crassus wound up offering him a better price. So really, the real winner in here are the pirates, because they got a shit ton of money. That trust that Spartacus has in the pirates is what ultimately leads to his downfall. And also what I love about this is that Spartacus is not a general. There is clearly a trap being laid for him here, but he's not seeing it. And I do very much like that. He walks straight into this trap. As soon as he leads his people to the ocean, I'm like, oh God, this is bad, because now he's cornered. He's cornered. And I love the scene where he realizes he is cornered once the pirates betray him. Or he's walked into a trap. And he's like, there's only one way we can do this, and that is to fight. And he doesn't want to fight because a lot of people will die, and a lot of people do die. But he is trapped on this beach, or where all he can do is march, by both Crassus's legions, Pompey, and this other guy who's coming from Sicily, I think, or somewhere around that area. And so it's a catch-22. If he stays there, he's going to get slaughtered by the guy from Sicily. If he moves across the mountains, he's going to run into Pompey. If he moves straight on to Rome, he's going to run into Crassus. He's completely trapped. It's catch-22, and I love that scene because he's not a general and he makes a huge mistake. I love that, because the generals just completely outwit him. Now, another performance I actually like more than Spartacus is Tony Curtis's Antonius. Now, Antonius, he plays a Greek slave in this movie. He does a phenomenal job. I mean it. He just, wow. Again, almost all of the performances in this movie are just utterly phenomenal, but Tony Curtis really stands out. And he has an interesting relationship with both Crassus and Spartacus. And it is, again, just very, very fascinating to try to dissect. And hopefully, I don't think I can, as much as I'm talking about this movie, I don't think I could possibly do it justice. You have to see this movie to truly believe it. Antonius was a slave, and Crassus buys him. And Crassus buys this slave out of pure lust. Now, this version of the movie I'm watching is the restored version, which has a few scenes added back in. One of the scenes that was cut is a scene that's coming up, because it has very homoerotic undertones to it, and it is confirmed. It is confirmed. So I'm very happy to see that scene back in. But Crassus takes this slave out of pure lust, because Crassus basically wants that man for himself. He wants him for his body, essentially. And something similar also happens with Crassus and Spartacus' wife, where he wants her, but he can't have her. We'll get into that more a little later when we actually talk about Crassus. But again, this relationship is set up that Crassus very much so wants Antonius as a lover, is during the oyster and snail speech. During the oyster and snail speech. It's nothing but one giant innuendo when they're bathing each other in this house, and I'm like, oh god. And what's interesting is that after that scene, Antonius runs away. And once again, just like Crassus has with Spartacus' wife, is that Crassus wants something he can never have. You see, he wants Spartacus' wife because, you know, he's Spartacus' wife, but he also wants him for his body. He wants Antonius, and now Antonius has also run off with Spartacus. Something he'll never have. But again, we'll get into more detail about that when we actually talk about Crassus. And this, again, all leads to Crassus' downfall, and we'll talk about that a little later. So Spartacus looks at Antonius as like the son he will never know. You know, he looks at Antonius like a son, and that's very much amplified in this scene with the magic trick scene. Because, you know, he has all of these tricks where he's like, oh, look, you cracked his egg open and a bird flies out and all that. You see, Antonius isn't a fighter. Antonius is a poet. He's a singer. He's a magician. You know, he's an entertainer. And all of a sudden, you know, Spartacus thinks he's got it down. And he's like, okay, I think I got it. Now give me an egg. And he gets an egg, and he's like, no, I want this bird to fly out. And when he does it, it's a regular egg. You know, and that's a wonderful scene. And everyone's laughing, and Spartacus is laughing, and everything like that. And that was the moment Spartacus said, no, you're not going to fight. You are going to do what you love best, and that is tell stories, write songs, and everything like that. And though Antonius ultimately fights because he has to. What's interesting is after that he says, you will write songs, you will entertain us, you will do great things. And Antonius goes, no, I want to fight. There's a great line, and this is the moment when I realized that Spartacus is looking at Antonius as more than just another person under his command. He starts looking at him as like the son, and you can clear that kind of fatherly relationship between the two. Where Spartacus goes, all men can fight. Any man can fight, any man can fight. I love that. I love that line very much. And they are always together throughout the film. Throughout the rest of the film, they are always side by side. And I love that. And the way Antonius looks at Spartacus is one very much so of respect, and one very much so of, I'm looking to you for answers. Because Antonius most certainly is not a leader. Antonius very much so is a follower, and especially in this field. And that is most prominently portrayed in the scene where they realize that the pirates have betrayed them. The entire time, despite the fact that both Spartacus and Antonius know that they're completely fucked, Antonius just looks over at him, right? He looks over at Spartacus, and it's like, give me an answer, anything, and I will do it. And I love that. The entire scene where Spartacus is trying to figure out what's going on, or what to do next, is Antonius is going, I will do whatever you ask me to do, because I trust you. That's very key. There's trust between the two of them. I love that very much. They stick together right through the very end, and we'll get into that very later. Now, on to my favorite character in the movie, and that is Laurence Olivier as fucking Crassus. Ooh. First off, Laurence Olivier is one of the greatest actors ever. I mean, you can't fucking beat him. I mean, he's just absolutely phenomenal. One of his greatest performances of all time is him as Richard III in Richard III. Like, oh my god. And also him as Zeus in Clash of the Titans. How can you beat that? Laurence Olivier, even in the movies that aren't that good, Laurence Olivier just steals the show. And Laurence Olivier steals the show in this movie as well. He's the best performance in this movie and the best character in the film. And one reason why I love him is that every scene he's in, you look in his eyes and you see nothing but pure hatred and anger. Now his face reactions are very calm, usually. Are very, very still, you know. But you look in his eyes and you see nothing but that pure anger. Now that takes talent. All these actors in this movie really know how to act with their eyes. The only other movie I've seen so much acting with eyes is in The Greatest Story Ever Told. And there's one scene that passes where there isn't hatred in his eyes, which ultimately leads to his downfall in the end. And what's interesting about Laurence Olivier, or Crassus, is that Crassus wants order for Rome. And he says that several times, even the last scene where he's talking with Julius Caesar, he's like, I want order. He's kind of like a Tarkin kind of character. I kind of compared this to Star Wars a few times. I'm on a bit of a Star Wars kick as well. He's kind of like Grand Moff Tarkin from the first Star Wars movie, if you look at it. He wants order. That's all he wants. He wants order for Rome, and it doesn't matter if the ends justify the means. He wants order, ruthless order. And he believes that the only way that this can happen is if he takes over the Senate. And that is why Cracus is his enemy. It's because Cracus knows that that's what Crassus believes and calls him out on it several times throughout the film. And what's cool about this is that Laurence Olivier is very cunning, and he manages to sway Julius Caesar into betraying Cracus and destroy Spartacus instead of letting them go. And that's how Crassus finds out that Cracus paid the pirates, was because he manages to sway Julius Caesar to join him. Because despite the fact that Julius Caesar agrees that the Senate is where the Roman Empire should go, it should stick with, he is named temporary dictator, and he realizes that he is also a soldier, and the best thing for a soldier to do is to fight, and is to defend what he loves. And so he sides with Crassus and gives Crassus the supreme commander of the armed forces, or whatever his position was. And he ultimately betrays Cracus. And Cracus knows this, but you can tell he still loves Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar was like a son to him. And may I just say that the guy who plays Caesar, Julius Caesar in this movie, is so fucking hot. What's cool about him, too, is that despite the fact that he betrays Cracus, Julius Caesar betrays Cracus, he does not like Crassus. Julius Caesar does not like Crassus. He sees straight through Crassus and is like, I can tell you're ambitious, and I can tell this is what you're going to try to do, and I can tell you're going to try to overthrow the Senate, and I'm not going to let you do that. And in many ways, he doesn't let him do that, but that's for a different thing. That's for the history books. The final scene during the gladiator fight, for example, you can just see the entire time he looks at Crassus like he is a madman. And that's just props to the actor. He just does not understand what's going on, and that's wonderful, and everything like that. Now, Crassus, despite that, him being a very good antagonist, he's not turned into a villain until after the battle scene, after he is victorious over Spartacus. Crassus, what has happened, he's very much so driven, like, I feel like this is the direction my country should go. He's an antagonist, don't get me wrong. He's going up against Spartacus, the protagonist, and that's quite frankly his job. But he's not a villain. He's not a villain until after Spartacus is defeated, and he starts crucifying all the slaves. Crassus is completely driven throughout the entire movie by hatred and bitterness. He hates the Senate for allowing so much chaos within the Roman Empire. Because again, there's a civil war going on kind of between Republicans and the people who want an empire. There's also two wars going on two fronts. They are stretched thin. There's a lot of chaos in the Roman Empire, and he hates that. He hates Spartacus for stealing the woman he wanted. Because there's a scene at the beginning where Crassus goes to see Peter Ustav's character, and he sees Spartacus's wife there, and he's like, I'm going to buy her. He winds up buying her, but she manages to escape. And then he finds out that she is with Spartacus. So he's mad at her because he wanted her, and he wanted her but couldn't have her. And now he has the same thing with Antonius. He had lust for both these two characters, and what did Spartacus? Spartacus took him away. So he hates Spartacus for that. He hates Spartacus for creating a lot of the chaos in the Roman Empire. And that's some wonderful stuff there. And he wants power for himself, because he wants power for Rome. He wants to take complete and total control over Rome. And he kind of gets it by becoming the supreme leader of the command forces. And when he does get it, he completely loses his mind. Now, unlike some villains would just want it for themselves for the sake of themselves, I believe Crassus genuinely thinks that he thinks he is the right man to do the job. He doesn't just want power for himself. I believe he genuinely thinks that he wants that power for himself. That being said, once he gets power, he kind of reminds me of Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where once she becomes Fire Lord, she completely loses her mind. And this is very personified when the scene where he finds out Antonius is with Spartacus. He ran away and went with Spartacus. That was towards the very end of the movie. And he has those two crucified last so that they can see those people that they worked with die before them, so that they can suffer. And he's doing that not because it's the right thing to do. He's doing that just out of pure hatred for both of these men. And then he steals Spartacus's wife and child. And he tries to win her over. He can't, because he doesn't know what love is. He doesn't. All he knows is hatred and bitterness. And he wants her to love him, but he can't actually love anything because he is so full of hate. And she even says, you're afraid. You're afraid of Spartacus. In which he says, yes, I am. I'm very terrified of Spartacus because he was able to get stuff that I wanted and I could never have. And that's when, she goes, you cannot destroy my love for him. And he goes, watch me. And then he goes out, he does all this stuff, and it's just utterly tragic. Wonderful stuff. And that's when he orders those two to fight. Now, in rage against what Spartacus' wife said, he has Antonius and Spartacus fight to the death in front of him, where he can just watch. That is one of the most intense fight scenes in the movie, and it only lasts 2 minutes. It kind of reminds me of the fight scene towards the end of Samurai Rebellion, where that fight scene is very calculated and very small, but it is one of my favorite fight scenes of all time, between two friends. This film, alright, Antonius refuses to allow Spartacus to die on the cross because of all the agony it causes, because he loves Spartacus as the father he never really had, or the father that he once had but was taken away from him at the age of 13. He would rather see Spartacus die by his own sword than to see him suffer on the cross. And yet Spartacus also refuses to let Antonius die on the cross because he loves him too much and doesn't want to see him suffer. They both want to kill each other for the same reasons. And there's this great line where they're walking into the ring and they know that there is absolutely no escape. No matter what they did, they're going to die. And Spartacus says, I want you to drop your sword. I will kill you in one swipe. It will be quick, it will be painless. And then all of a sudden Tony Curtis goes, no. I will fight you to the death. And of course Spartacus ultimately wins because Spartacus is a gladiator, not an artist like Antonius. It is so powerful, that scene. The way how, Spartacus, after stabbing Antonius, holds him on the ground. And Antonius goes, I loved you, Spartacus. I love you so much. And Spartacus goes, I love you too. Like the sun I will never see. And then he dies and he's just utterly dead. And Spartacus is then crucified. Very powerful moment. But that is the scene where Crassus just goes utterly mad. He just kills everything he's afraid of. And that fear ultimately is what leads to his downfall actually later on in his life. Because this is very true that Crassus did this shit. Crassus was a madman towards the end of his life, and that's what led to his downfall with the triumvirate with Julius Caesar, Pompey, and himself. It's what led to his downfall. I love Crassus's character. I can't describe him enough. He's just a wonderful character. Crassus is a tragic character. He's a tragic villain. He has everything in the world at his fingertips now. And once he gets everything in the world on his fingertips, he just lets it go. He just falls completely apart, because it's like he's wanted it for so long. Now that he's got it, he doesn't know what to do with his life. He doesn't know what to do. And again, that's what leads to his character's downfall and demise, and completely destroys him as a redeemable character, because what he does to absolutely humiliate and destroy both Spartacus, Antonius, and Spartacus' wife, and Crassus, and all these people. He just utterly humiliates them for the sake of humiliating them. It's very tragic and very sad. This film is epic. This film is fucking huge. And there are thousands of extras. I mean, this movie is just so gorgeously done. One of my favorite scenes are where you see in the foreground, you see all the gladiators and the escaped slaves lined up, and then all of a sudden you just see the columns of Roman legions just marching towards them. And these shots linger on, and you have Alex Norris's music that's just utterly brooding and brash. That's just absolutely phenomenal. These shots are huge. Today it would have all been done with CGI. No, they had 10,000 extras there, and by God, I think all of them were on screen at one point. And wow, those battle scenes are huge. Speaking of the battle scene, I wish the battle scene was a tad bit longer. It just kind of ends. There's no real weight to the battle scene because we don't see many characters die. It just suddenly the battle just happens and then it ends. Granted, the battle is fucking gorgeous and surprisingly gory. This movie is surprisingly gory for the 60s. A lot of epics, like look at El Cid, for example, is very tame when it comes to its violence. This movie is right in your face. There's a lot of blood, there's a lot of severed limbs. There are women and children just getting slaughtered in this film and lying dead on the ground. Wow, I mean, that was ballsy back then, especially for a big budget epic like this. And again, a lot of those scenes were cut out of the theatrical version of the film. But my problem with that battle scene is it just ends. It just suddenly fades to the decimated bodies. And I mean, those are very sorrowing and sobering shots. But the battle scene just fades away and it ends halfway through it. And what I wish it was, because this battle was built up as such, was that I wish this battle ended on something like the Alamo. And what was awesome about the John Wayne's The Alamo, John Wayne's The Alamo, we see all these characters that we loved, that we learned to love so much, just die. And there's a lot of weight to it. And it's very sad and very somber and very powerful. I wish this battle was a bit longer. I wish this battle showed these characters that we know and love dying, getting stabbed and brutally murdered. And I think it would have been a lot better. I would have been willing this battle go on for another 5 minutes to see these characters that we know and love die. That would add, I think, a little bit more of an emotional punch, especially considering that the next scene that follows after that is the most iconic scene in the movie, which is when they are asked who is Spartacus, and everyone stands up and goes, "I'm Spartacus." I think it would have added a lot more weight to that if we saw a lot of these characters that we learned to love, or at least know, die. Instead, all we see is John Ireland's character die, and John Ireland's character isn't really a character. So I wish it went on a little longer, though what we have is fantastic nonetheless. And that is also helped by Alec North's Alec North did the music for this movie, and it's utterly beautiful, and brash, and gargantuan. It's not Miklos Rozsa good, but it's fucking phenomenal. I mean, just listen to it. I fucking adore it. It's my favorite theme in the movie actually isn't, the battle themes or anything like that. It's actually the love theme. It's the love theme between Spartacus and his wife that is utterly good. And it's so, so beautiful and just wonderful. And this score really influenced a lot of people. This score mainly influenced a lot of Jerry Goldsmith's style, but above all, it influenced significantly John Williams' Star Wars, specifically Episode 5 and 6. Everything with this movie just works perfectly together. This movie is an almost perfect film. Yes, it has some problems, as I just kind of stated throughout this review, but it is a very great film, and I highly recommend it. I recommend it as a must-see. This is an art movie. This is a beautiful film. Everything about this movie is good. All the performances are good. The music is good. Cinematography is good. Everything is just good with this movie. And I can't recommend it anymore. You have to go out and watch this movie. I'm sorry. You just have to. This review does not do the movie justice. It does not. You have to watch this movie yourself. So easily, I give this movie a 4 out of 4 stars and highly recommend it to the utmost degree. Now, in the end, I would like to say like AN Productions on Facebook for up-to-date information and even some side text reviews for movies I do not post on the YouTube channel. And also, do go on Facebook, like my new movie, Which Way They Walk, which we begin filming in February 13th and February 27th to be exact. Those are the final 2 days of the film, and then the movie will be done. Thank God. Like the Godzilla Saga on Facebook, hit the like button for this movie, leave a comment telling me your thoughts on the movie if you agree or disagree. I'd love to hear your opinion. And hit the subscribe button, and stay tuned for more reviews and more videos to come, and stay tuned for Which Way They Walk. So in the end, this is Antoninus of AN Productions saying, sayonara.